Hi, I'm Dr. Kyle Varner, and I have been involved for several years in the struggle to free Venezuela from socialism. I've been to the Venezuelan border providing medical care to refugees. I've seen horrible things with my own eyes, and I've developed deep connections with people still inside Venezuela who are working to set their country free. But a lot of people in the United States don't know and don't understand why Venezuela is having an economic crisis like it is. So I want to tell you the top 7 things that Hugo Chavez did to destroy the Venezuelan economy. This is important from a historical perspective, but it's also very important for anybody who wants to understand what's necessary to have a wealthy society and a good economy. So the first thing that Hugo Chavez did when he took over in Venezuela is that he destroyed the oil sector. Now, you might think, well, that's the most important financial sector in Venezuela, and you're right. And he didn't destroy it right off the bat. But here's what he did. Oil was already socialized. That was socialized in the 1970s. But Hugo Chavez set about, once he took power, a plan of making himself extremely popular through a process known as clientelism. What he did is he took money from the oil revenues, plus money he could borrow based on future oil revenues, and he used it to spend lavishly on people who would support him. Initially, he used it to spend lavishly on low-income voters so that they would give him more and more power. But little by little, he didn't have a need for them, but he still had a need for things like military generals and members of the National Assembly to support him. So he was going to direct oil revenue towards those people. But here's the problem. He was not continually investing in the oil infrastructure. And so what happened is over time, oil output fell. Oil output fell because he was investing in political ends, not in having more oil. This resulted in, at this point, Venezuela having roughly 10% of the oil production it did at its peak, despite the fact that they are the country with more oil reserves than anywhere else in the world. The next thing he did was mass expropriation of businesses. He expropriated, before he died, about 10,000 businesses, 10,000 of the largest corporations in Venezuela. He took them out of the private hands of their owners and he put them into the hands of political cronies. And that meant that those businesses crashed. He drove 10,000 businesses into the ground. Number 3, he created a system of export controls that effectively prohibited export of non-oil commodities. So this meant that thousands and thousands of businesses failed because they couldn't sell their products. Here's how it worked. If you export a product, you had to get the government's permission by showing that there was no need for it in the domestic market. But when you exported it, the government knew exactly how much you exported and how much you received for it, and they forced you to convert that foreign currency at the official rate instead of the unofficial rate, because there were 2 exchange rates of bolivars to dollars in Venezuela. What this meant is that there was an effective 70% tax on any export from the private economy, no matter what you were profiting on. It was a 70% tax of gross. This meant that nobody could export profitably, and exports of non-oil commodities went to almost zero, thanks to the economic mismanagement of Hugo Chavez. Next, he destroyed the currency. He destroyed the currency the same way any tyrant destroys a currency. He used a printing press. And there has never been more inflation than under the Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro regimes in the history of humankind. They've just printed and printed money. And it's important to realize that inflation is a tax, because when you have money in your pocket today that's worth 10% less tomorrow, it means that the government took 10% from you. They spend the money they newly minted among their political clients, and they were able to increase the amount of political power they held. But what it meant is that it took the savings away from everyone. Next, Hugo Chavez created a nationwide, city-by-city, organized crime network. These are called colectivos, and what they are is a Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro aligned criminal organization, paramilitary organization that exists in every city. They armed these people, and then they made a deal with them. They said, you may commit crimes like extortion, like robbery, like kidnapping, and the government will look the other way. And that way you can generate money. And so now, every single business in Venezuela has to pay what they call la vacuna, which is basically a bribe in exchange for not having your business shut down. Your business burned to the ground, which is what they usually do when you don't pay la vacuna. Here's what this means for the economy of Venezuela. It means that not only are people paying regular taxes, not only are they paying inflationary taxes because the currency is being devalued, but they also have to pay taxes to a separate organized crime network. And so the people are having extremely, extremely high and oppressive levels of taxation. And the colectivos have a lot to do with that. Why would anyone start a business when the colectivos are going to come and ask for a vacuna? Well, the answer is they probably wouldn't, which is why businesses became less and less popular to start, and the economy continued in a horrible downward spiral. Next, Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro expropriated vast amounts of agricultural land. Here's the problem with expropriating agricultural land. You take it from farmers who know what to do with it, and you give it to political supporters who never farmed a day in their life. They don't know how to farm. And so as a result, production plummets. Now here's the problem. When domestic production of food plummets, you have to rely on imports. In order to import, you have to export. But export was effectively prohibited in the non-oil sector. The oil sector had output falling because of malinvestment. And as a result, you have a hunger crisis where the average Venezuelan has lost 11 kilograms, over 20 pounds, where people are dying of hunger. And this has to do with the steps that they took to destroy domestic production, destroy exports, and completely destroy the economy. And I've seen it in my own patients who suffer from severe malnutrition on the border as refugees. It's because of these economic policies. Finally, the last thing that Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro did is they caused Atlas to shrug. What do I mean by that? Atlas Shrugged is a tremendous book written by an author named Ayn Rand that describes what happens when the producers and the innovative people, the movers and shakers in society, give up and stop working. Well, that's happened in Venezuela. You see, people knew what was going to happen when Hugo Chavez got elected, which is why 100,000 people left immediately. Today, that number stands at almost 5 million. Who's moving? Who's leaving? Well, the first people to go are the people with money. Second people to go are the people with high levels of human capital. That's why right now, there are 0.47 doctors in Venezuela per 100,000 people, compared to about 47 in the United States, and we still complain we have a shortage here in the United States. It's accountants, it's lawyers, it's people who have high amounts of training for different jobs. It's also the entrepreneurs. And then it's also the ambitious people who aren't afraid to take risks. They all leave. And in their wake, when they've left because conditions are no longer tolerable, everything starts to collapse. People start to starve. People die of easily treatable diseases. Misery becomes rampant. And you know, Venezuela now has the highest rate of suicide. The rate of suicide has gone up by 5 times what it used to. The highest rate of suicide in all of South America. These people are literally killing themselves because the situation is so bad in the country. What do all of these things have to do with each other? They're all elements of central economic planning. They're all elements of socialism. These are all really ham-handed attempts to implement a socialist utopia. And Venezuela is not the only place that this has happened in. When Salvador Allende got elected as president of Chile and tried to usher in a socialist utopia, they had a similar rapid economic collapse. And when Allende was deposed, In 5 years, infant mortality dropped 50%, and Chile went from the poorest country in South America to the richest country in South America. Literally everywhere in the globe where we've seen socialism implemented, we see similar desperation and starvation. Whether it was China under Mao, or Cambodia under Pol Pot, or whether it's Cuba, or any place, the Soviet Union, millions of people have died because of socialism. And these are the steps the socialists take. Here's the bottom line fundamental principle. An economy flourishes based on spontaneous order, on everybody individually working, investing, and innovating and producing. When you try to impose central economic planning on an economy like that, what you get is disaster, death, and starvation. You can't get away from it. It's the way the world works. I am very alarmed by people who claim that somehow we can have a democratic form of socialism that can come and be the next model of a beautiful new, brave new world. Well, here's the problem. Notice how the oil sector got destroyed because of malinvestment? Some people might say that that's because Hugo Chavez was a bad investor. But what he was doing was acting according to democratic incentives. He knew that in order to consolidate power, he had to bribe people for votes and bribe people for political support, and oil was his way of doing it. And that's what happens under socialism. Instead of making economic decisions based on considerations about productivity and overall well-being, politicians make economic decisions based on their political expediency. And as a result, they're not trying to produce more. They're not trying to actually feed the country. They're trying to consolidate power. That's what happens when you consolidate economic power in the hands of an elite. The answer is very simple. Free market capitalism. Free market capitalism creates abundance anywhere where it's implemented. There are a few ingredients. Number one, the government needs to keep its hands off the economic scales and leave production in private hands. Number two, there needs to be a system of strong protection of private property. No expropriations. You need to know that when you invest in something, when you build a house, it's yours. When you buy something, it's yours, because that encourages investment, that allows the security necessary to develop an advanced economy. And finally, you need to have the rule of law. You need not have organized crime groups coming demanding bribes of vacunas in order not to burn down your building. You need to have security. And under these conditions, investment flourishes, production flourishes, and human beings flourish. Under conditions like these, we see lifespan of human beings go up and up and up. We see diseases go down and down, malaria getting eliminated, tuberculosis going down. We see human flourishing. Private property, rule of law, and free market capitalism. That's the recipe for success. If you want a recipe for human misery, for starvation, and the deprivation of everything possible from human beings, just look to Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. They have led the most recent collapse of a society, but it's nothing new. This happens over and over again when socialism is tried in the history books. So next time you hear someone promoting socialism as some kind of a form of justice, ask them how just it is that children are starving in the streets of Venezuela today. That's socialism, and it has nothing to do with justice. Thanks for watching. I'm Dr. Kyle Varner.